Representative Cecil Bell walk in. He can only stay for a minute, but he's here and he'd like to address the crowd, so we're going to go ahead and give him the opportunity.
I think we're all right. First off, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and I understand that Nira has already done a good job of reading my comments. That I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I drove in from Austin, not specifically for this. I actually have a sick wife sitting in the pickup, but anybody wants the flu, she's out there. You can go get it. But she's got a doctor's appointment in the morning, and so I am here. But I don't necessarily want to repeat what has already been said. Obviously, it is very important that we do exactly what Bill just said, stand up for our rights as Texans and our rights as citizens. And it's very, very important that we do those things, because private property rights are not something to be taken for granted. And as I said, the very first time I spoke to this group over at the function at the Knights of Columbus, you know, science ultimately is the way you beat things like this when you're talking about agencies. And in the end, that first application was returned because the piezometers, those monitoring wells, started pushing water out just like the folks in this room said they were going to. So because of your persistence, because of the willingness to stay that course, that petition was returned. That petition, before it was returned, the director of the TCEQ certainly reached out to me and to Senator Colhorst and said, look, this is what we understand is happening. My comment had been and continues to be that for agencies to have the authority they hold, then they must be perceived by us, and must indeed not just be perceived, but must hold integrity. And so if the process says you get one try, you get one try. If the process says two, you get two, but you don't just get to keep resetting the clicker every time. And so ultimately, so that's ultimately what the basis for which it was returned for. The second one, you know, there was an ordinance put in place inside Hempstead and inside the county. They recognized in their second application that they couldn't stay in the county, so they redesigned their landfill, made it bigger than it had been, but moved it outside of the city ordinance and into Hempstead's ordinance, and failed to acknowledge that there was an ordinance in place. So that caused them to have a disqualified application again. When those calls are made from the director to say, hey, what is the take? Well, the take is you got to have, and you got to conduct yourself with certainty and with integrity. And so it's not an agency's job to interpret whether an ordinance has preeminence or not. We have courts for that, and ultimately I suspect that's where they will go. With that said, the other thing that we're doing as your state representative, or I'm doing as your state representative, is I'm working on a bill that looks at treating areas where we have sand seams that are in direct contact with our aquifers, much like we have in Texas a standard that deals with the Edwards Aquifer because of the capillary nature. You know, when you put rocks together, there's holes in there, and when you that water that's up at the top just runs all the way down into that aquifer that's everyone's drinking water. Well, when you have sand seams like what we have in this area where this landfill has been proposed to be put, that recharge rate is so fast that it's a certainty that you have that same type of direct connection with the aquifer, and it's incumbent that ultimately we provide some type of guidelines for the TCEQ. Otherwise, what they're doing is operating under a set of standards that the federal government put in place, that they overlay across the state of Texas, with the only exception being the Edwards Aquifer Basin. And I don't think that one size fits all. If you do, swap shoes with the person sitting beside you and let's go for a walk, and then we can come back and talk about it. But so we do need to understand that it's about protecting the resource, recognizing that agencies have a job to do, recognizing that you know, probably none of us want to live by airports, none of us want to live by anything, but for agencies to do what they have to, they must be absolutely adhering to the guidelines that are established. And so the TCEQ has, I think, under this new latest director, has made an effort to move into that course and direction, and I intend to see that they continue to hold that course, and I think that's what they intend to do as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the process, about any part of it that I can perhaps answer. Beyond that, yes, ma'am.
I hear about so many bills being filed and very few bills even get out of committee. What are the odds they don't get out of committee?
So there's really not a set of odds for how you get a bill out of committee. So the Constitution and the whole process is designed to kill bills. You know, when you hear people talk about, well, the House didn't start as soon as the Senate, or this or that, whatever those conversations are, just realize the intent is to kill bills, because bills only apply, and get this is what most people fail to catch, only apply to law-abiding citizens. So whenever we pass bills, it's us that we're affecting, because criminals, if they cared about our laws, would already, that's right. So the system was designed to make sure that we don't create a bunch of laws. The job of your state rep, of your senator, is to take good bills and keep them alive in this very caustic environment that is by design intended to limit the number of laws that we add to our books each session. But I'm comfortable and confident in being able to articulate the challenge faced by these types of geographic stratas. They don't exist everywhere, but where they exist, we need to not ignore the fact that they're existing there. Just exactly like the Edwards Aquifer. You know, it's not responsible to ignore the fact that if you literally pour a can of oil at the surface within hours, it's in the aquifer. Well, we got to be responsible. We can't do those things, and maybe this recharge rate is not that fast, but I'm going to tell you, it's pretty phenomenally fast when you look at how full it was and how fast it goes out. That's a direct connection with the aquifer. So I'm not able to set a set of standards and say what is the likelihood of success. What I do know is that there are a lot of people there who agree that we need to make sure we protect our resources. And I think this is a responsible way to look at how do we acknowledge the obligation to keep Texas a place where we can do business, where all those other things go along, but we're at the same time, we protect our resources, our most valuable one. You know, we can live without oil, we can live without electricity, we can live without a lot of things. Can't live without water. You just die. And you don't have commerce without water. You don't have anything without water. Yes, sir.
In your prior life in construction, you used to have to do de-water. Have you ever tried to de-water an area 23 feet?
Yes, sir. Actually, so and I just want to make one clarification. My wife won't live on $600. I appreciate it greatly, the $600, but she will not live on it. So that's actually not my prior life. That continues to be my day job when I am not at the Capitol during session working for you guys. I do put that on hiatus during that period of time, because it's very important that we focus on those issues, because that's that narrow window, and it's established that way by Constitution. But I have, I built structures that were 60 foot in the ground and were well below the water table, but it is a very difficult challenge when you have hydrostatic water setting there to try to create a safe zone to be able to work in where that water is not up in. So let me clarify. I'm a contractor by profession. I build water plants and wastewater plants and underground utilities, and I've done those things since as a self-employed individual since 1983. I think I hold the distinction of being one of the only humans who can stand before you and say that I've been in the same industry since the day they brought me home. Literally, I was born at Polyron Hospital in Rosenberg, Texas. That same day, my dad came pick me up, took me home to the 6th Street wastewater treatment plant in Rosenberg, Texas, to the little travel trailer that my parents lived in, where Dad was a foreman, labor foreman, for the R.B. Butler Company, building the wastewater plant there. So I have actually been in that particular industry since the day I was born. So,
Dewatered 23 feet.
have I dewatered 23 feet? Yes, sir. We've dewatered 60 feet is about the deepest that we've actually dewatered. We built a lift station over off University Drive in Bryan, Texas, that was a 45-foot diameter, 60-foot deep structure. It's a very difficult challenge to be able to accomplish, but you can.
The footprint for a landfill.
But well, on the footprint for a landfill, you create a whole new dynamic, because what happens is, so the way dewatering works is there's an angle from wherever point you're pumping at. You already know this, but for those of you who may not know this, when you're trying to dewater something, if you want to create a dry spot, then you've got to pump far enough below it with enough ability to pull water through those seams to be able to create a dry spot. If you want a dry spot this big, then your wells have to be down here, because these angles have to converge where the bottom of your dry spot has to be. When that dry spot's as large as that landfill, you're going to be pumping in the middle of it to be able to try to keep it dry enough to build the structure. You know, there are other, and I've spent a lot of time talking to the different folks.
Where I live, if they get it dried out, I won't have any water.
That's a possibility. That's,
On a lot of these people.
yes, sir.
We won't have water.
Yes, sir.
If they succeed, we lose.
Yes, sir. And so I don't know how deep they would have to, I mean, I think for them to contemplate, and I've never built a landfill. I like everybody, ultimately probably have sent a lot of things to a landfill, but it is a challenge, and to be able to, speculate on what the effects would be on the water table. It would pull the water table down. Now, how far it pulls it down depends on exactly how deep those wells are and how fast you're pulling that water out of those wells. But anyway, any other questions that I can?
Over here.
Yes, ma'am.
I talked a couple of times when TCEQ came to town, and they seem to have no concern about the environment, the effect on the quality of the environment if a landfill were put here. And they said they had no authority except to see if they met the qualifications for the landfill. And I was stunned at that the environment didn't matter, the effect on the property values, none of that sort of thing mattered to them. Or they didn't seem to think they had the legal authority to get into that area.
So I think,
I don't know if we have a gap in our different commissions, or those in authority for our state, but that troubles me.
so I think what you're seeing is, so recalling again that very first conversation, the reason we have agencies is because we as a growing population will ultimately have to build airports, we'll have to build schools, we'll have to build landfills somewhere, whether they're here or not. That's why we're sitting here in this room. This is not a place you should build a landfill. They are, that agency is charged with looking at the standard that they have to be built to, designed to. They look to the professional engineer that is there. Agencies, I describe them as emotionless entities who are charged with looking just at a body of evidence, if you will, and determining whether it works or not. Now, the reason that we got into the trouble we got into the first time was historically that agency had directors who would just grant repeated petitions, and agencies began to develop their own flow of how things work. But under Director Hyde, they've since stopped that process as best I can tell. So if you want to design a facility here and the actual design for a landfill falls under a federal standard that was passed years ago, and so TCEQ adopted that standard. And as I said before, the only exception to that standard is the Edwards Aquifer Basin in Texas right now. So they're taking a one-size-fits-all approach, and they're saying if it's designed within it, then it's not that they're not concerned about the environment, but the design criterion says it's defending the environment, so therefore that's not where they focus. So, but again, science ultimately prevails when you're in the wrong spot. If you don't concede, and you guys didn't concede, and I appreciate that. I'm thankful for that. And I've been working on this process since that very first day. I'm not necessarily, Senator Coe, of course, a great cheerleader and a great advocate. I'm a great advocate. I push hard. I work hard. I'm not necessarily that person who is jumping up and down, but I'm one of those folks that the agency is looking at and saying, okay, how do you, what do you think we're doing wrong? Well, I think you've got to have integrity, and right now the citizens of Waller County don't believe you have any. That was in that first petition.
You got a big shadow.
Absolutely. And so, so that's how that's more of how I function in the legislature as your state representative and for the body of people that are here. So, but anyway, hopefully that answered some of your question in the sense of how does that agency work? They're not charged with looking at how necessarily they do weigh all of it. There's a process where they do take all of the citizen input into consideration and all those things, but then their ultimate charge is to weigh all of that, to look and see if it fits within the design matrix that was put together. Now, why is it important that I successfully carry a bill? Because it's not just Waller County, it's anywhere where a landfill might be proposed on top of that type of sand seam. If you have stiff clays that are as deep as this room, then you have limited, they're called aqualudes. If you have the top of ground up here and you're below ground and you got a lot of sand and stuff like that, and then you've got a layer of clay, and then you've got your water down under that layer of clay. That aqualude is that separating layer of rock or clay or whatever that protects that aquifer. In this case, you don't have that. You've got this big deep seam of sand that has these little straggling fingers of clay that run in and out. So that water just kind of goes like this. And whenever that aquifer is down low, that water's running out as fast as you put it in because it's in sand. When the aquifer is full, like it is during wet seasons, then it pushes water out of the top of the ground because literally the aquifer can't take that water as fast as it's trying to push it into it, and so the effect is you have a spring. What we would have called it, if we didn't have the piezometer, just had water running out on top of the ground. What do you have? You got a spring. Runs during the wet times. And so anyway, other questions? Well, I appreciate you. God bless you guys. God bless Texas. And thank you, Nira, for being here and for doing a great job. Nira Miller is our district director. Of course, our office in Austin is 512-463-0650. Chief of Staff is Ariane Marion. And so anything you guys need, holler. And appreciate it. Again, God bless you and God bless Texas.
Thank you. Let's just start that. Oh, no. I'm glad to have you. I hope your wife gets over the flu.
Me too.